This is Donald Parham. You're listening to Chargers Unleashed, part of the LAFB Network. Stay jiggy.
And this is Chris from the second, Chargers outside linebacker, and make sure you check out Chargers Unleashed.
Shout out to Chargers Unleashed, Sebastian Joseph. They know the vibes. We outside.
You checking in with Mike Williams from the LA Chargers, and you're tuning in to Chargers Unleashed.
You're listening to the Chargers Unleashed podcast with your host, Dan Wolkenstein and Jake Hefner.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Today's show, of course, is being brought to you by BetOnline, Charger Bolt family, and Rock Solid Sports memorabilia. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Dan Wolkenstein, as we officially begin, at least from the Chargers standpoint, the 2023 offseason.
Oof.
Got a chance to talk to the Charger faithful as we had the live show on Monday following the fallout of the historic collapse that it was of the Chargers playoff loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars.
We got to do more of those, by the way.
The live shows?
Yes.
Oh, it was popping on Monday. That was for sure. You know, for some reason, I think anger and despair just attracts, I mean, who knew? Who knew? Sounds like some salesman came up with that like a long time ago. I'm sure that somebody did. But continuing this week, we were just hot off the press with the first Brandon Staley press conference that he did live in front of the media. First comments that we've heard really from him since the loss and what is going to happen moving forward. Obviously, we've had some coaching shakeups here in the last 48 hours with the team, and we're going to dive into it. Lots to cover. Lots of key takeaways, speculation, questions that maybe were answered, maybe were some. You make the most of it, what you will. But before we dive into it, Dan Wolkenstein, how are you doing?
Jake Hefner, friends and family, everyone worldwide. I'm doing great. Thank you. It's a hump day, Wednesday. Brandon Staley just came out and gave lots of insights into kind of the vision for this upcoming offense, what he sees it becoming, some of the shortcomings from this team, what to look for this offseason, some of the things he's proud of, some of the lessons learned. We'll get into all of that as we kind of go through, kind of giving you guys the takeaways. But Jake, I'm great. How are you?
I'm about as good as can be, my friend. About as good as can be.
Is the Chargers status what's got you down?
Each day's getting better. Each day's getting better. It's times like these where taking a deep dive into the 2023 draft class just really brings you a sense of mental clarity.
I thought you were going to go Foo Fighters and just start singing this times like these. You learn to love again. No? Okay.
No, but nice plug. That was well done.
All right. So, Jake, over under, how many apologies you heard from Brandon Staley today?
Apologies in like the phrases of "I'm sorry" or like subtle apologies.
Let's go subtle. I'll put the line at 2.5.
Under. Under.
Which I think might ruffle some feathers with the fan base. But again, we'll talk about it and kind of put context into it. Jake, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline real quick.
Well, want to remind everybody that BetOnline remains your number one source for all of your sports betting needs this season. You'll always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends over at BetOnline. And as your continued source for all sports wagering information, BetOnline features live betting, free contests, and giveaways all season long. Always the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports and events, whether that's NFL, NBA, NHL, MMA, tennis, boxing, or even golf. Head on over to betonline.ag today and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. And make sure to use that promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to receive your rewards. Bet online, where the game starts.
Okay, so let's go right off the top, kind of do the real quick high-level things that we learned, and then we'll kind of go into it for folks who want to kind of get a quick 30-second elevator pitch on the Brandon Staley press conference. So, Jake, I'm going to go 3, then you go 3 real quick. Here we go. Number 1 for me, Brandon Staley said that he is going to continue to call plays for the defense in 2023. Number 2, Brandon Staley said that they are looking for an offensive scheme that has more firepower, that puts more pressure on the defense, that allows more on the offensive line in terms of finesse, in terms of more physicality, technique, more motion on the offense. And then number 3, they are looking for a style of offense to mirror that of what you see in the Shanahan tree. Jake, next three. Go.
I mean, I think for me, kind of gave a little bit of insight what he was looking for the next offensive coordinator, obviously with Joe Lombardi and Shane Day no longer being part of this offensive staff. And it didn't really give you one insight to the other, where he was looking for veteran leadership or from a young, a younger up and coming coordinator standpoint. He basically just said leadership is at the forefront of the search. So we'll see what that means, what it could mean as far as any indications for hints. The calling the defensive plays to me, Dan, that stuck with me as well. That's the one that I still have some questions about personally.
We'll get into it.
And I think still the fallout from the comments that were 100% justified for the media pushing back on him in relation to the Mike Williams situation from week 18 of this season, and how in one respect or another, where Brandon Staley is going to learn from that, stick to his guns, what his plans were. It was a multiple questions that were asked about it. Daniel Popper specifically kept pushing back, which I thought he did great on. But other than what you said, those were probably my biggest takeaways.
You heard Brandon Staley talk about the vision alignment that was needed for the offense, and that was one of the bigger reasons why Lombardi and Shane Day were ultimately let go. He wants alignment with the coaching staff, which he mentioned was a big part in why that happened. He did say that the Chargers fans should expect more changes to the coaching staff this offseason. Now, whether that is because of folks being let go or folks being plucked or other organizations remains to be told, but we will find out. He mentioned that the offensive coordinator position is one of kind of the hot jobs for the NFL to come into for these Chargers. And so he's not necessarily looking for someone who has the most experience, but he wants to have someone who can bring what they need in terms of vision. And it was interesting to kind of hear him talk about what they needed on offense and the importance that he put on the lack of running game this team had, and how balanced offense is key to a explosive offense. At one point he mentioned you can get explosive plays by handing it to your running back every time, but if you can't run it, you're not going to get explosive plays anywhere. So he discussed kind of the need for speed possibly, or if you need speed. But he kind of mentioned, I guess more importantly, that the offense needs to improve, and the vision that he saw for this offense, Joe Lombardi and Shane Day, it just didn't work out.
You know, the Shane Day firing, when that took place, that was a little bit of a surprise to me. I looked at that as a potential internal hire if the Chargers were going to go that route. Not necessarily that it would have been the right decision, but I could have seen them potentially doing that, given that Shane Day has obviously worked very closely with Justin Herbert over the last couple of years. But if you're going to bring in a brand new offensive coordinator, and one that, according to Staley, fits the vision that he's looking for this offense, you have to assume that they're going to want to bring on some of their additional staff as well, whoever is going to take that job. And obviously from an offensive coordinator standpoint, as far as openings goes, it's probably one of the most coveted right now among all of the job openings that are out there. Dan, I did like this little tack on as it relates to that offensive coordinator position, because I forget who it was that asked it, but someone asked Staley if he was going to continue to explore the Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan offensive style for their next offensive coordinator. And he said, I think it's fair to say that the experiences I have, that's a fair assessment of the style of play, because that's the offense that I believe in. So, you know, that fits into who his first choice was for bringing on to the staff in Mike McDaniel. That made a lot of sense. And then you hear about some of the names that have been talked about since then, as far as the possible coaches that could be available. Now, we'll obviously see, since Sean McVay has announced that he is going to be returning next year. Still names that I had put out there. Zach Robinson, who's the current quarterbacks coach of the Rams, is one that's linked to him. I am forgetting the name right now, but it's the tight end coach that also is with the Rams, that has built up some good rapport, obviously, that Staley has some familiarity with. But that could just give you one indication as far as where they might start to look. And he's still going to continue that philosophy that he started 2 years ago.
And on that note, Jake, I'm glad you mentioned that. Brandon Staley mentioned specifically he wants the offense moving forward to have pace and motion to pressure opposing defenses, which, hello.
No kidding.
What have we not seen for the better part of 2 years?
I thought that was preached in football 101.
Yes. And so he wants the next head coach to have leadership, but more specifically, get them to play the certain style that they need to play. So you mentioned the Shanahan tree. We'll see. I think that's music to a lot of folks' ears on what they see in terms of the vision for this offense. He mentioned kind of the growth of Justin Herbert, kind of how he's been able to overcome so much that was thrown at him, still get this team to the playoffs. He mentioned one thing that was interesting in terms of the offense that was a reason for the Shane Day Lombardi release was the idea around kind of the vision of the importance of line of scrimmage and like technique and fundamentals and physicality that the team was lacking, which we've talked about at length. And so for him to kind of own that, accept that, discuss that's what he's looking for, to me, I was like, thank you. Thank you. At least you're acknowledging what easy eyes can see on the TV screen. It'll be interesting to see who that is that aligns to that can establish that vision, bring that pace and motion, put pressure on the defense, be balanced on offense in terms of run and pass. I guess the last of the bigger topics that I got was the importance and the, I guess, pride he had in the improvement on special teams. Jake, and you and I, we've talked about this for 3 years now, since we've been doing shows together. The special teams has been one of, if not the kryptonite for this Chargers team for better part of a decade. And I believe the Chargers ended the season 6th ranked special teams in the NFL. I think they gave up the least return yards in the NFL. You got to tip your cap to him and team for that. The defense kind of rounded a corner a bit, sans second half of Jacksonville. But special teams, given what they had to go through this year, again, 3 kickers they had to go through, and all of the attrition on the roster, all the younger folks playing, new punter, new kicker, new gunners, and they ended up 6th in the NFL. Like, you have to tip your cap to that. You hope that that is one of the things that stays next season.
Yeah, Dan, I think that we forget it. I'm glad you mentioned everybody knows what Cameron Dicker's done since he came into that starting role. But even going through 3 kickers this year, because Dustin Hopkins is like a long ago memory at this point, given what Cameron Dicker's done. But Dan, in total, all 3 kickers that kicked for this team for this season, I think they missed a combined 4 kicks. I mean, that's wild considering what the Chargers kicking situation used to be a couple years ago.
Go look at the Cowboys playoff game. Their kicker missed 3 extra points and a half.
It's wild to see the jump that this special teams unit as a whole made in just one season under special teams coach Ryan Fitkin. So yeah, you got to tip, Coach Staley for the hiring in that circumstance, but still some more questions that need to be figured out.
Sure.
Still some more questions. And as he alluded to, it doesn't sound like the firings are quite done yet and that more changes will be forthcoming. We just don't know specifically what those will be.
He did touch on the Joey Bosa issue that happened at the end of the Jacksonville game.
His first response to that was actually hilarious.
Go ahead.
I can't remember who asked it, but basically said, why did you pick up Joey Bosa's helmet while I was on the ground? It's like, because it was laying right there in front of me. Yeah, it was a great response.
He acknowledged that lack of poise costed this team, and specifically Joey Bosa's lack of poise at the end of that game affected this team negatively. He said it got the best of him. Did note kind of the headwinds that Joey Bosa had to face all season coming back with rehab and the injury and the surgery he had. But he acknowledged that the team needs to have better poise at the end of the game. Specifically for that Jacksonville game, obviously highlighted the success they had in the first half, but the things he wishes he could have done differently, he pointed to execution and penalties as kind of the biggest piece in that second half. Execution on all 3 phases and then the penalties that really costed them. So I think that penalties / poise and then execution on both sides is what he deemed costed them, which I would push back a bit on the execution because there are plenty of videos out there that show the difference in defensive schemes, specifically offense or defense from the first half to the second half, and how soft the second half defense was playing. But that's for another day. So poise, execution.
See, but this is Brandon Staley truly is an intelligent human being and is really, really good with it, let's just say skirting questions to the media. Someone asked him, did you feel like you were out-coached by Doug Peterson? So well, I didn't feel like it was that way in the first half, which is basically a roundabout way of saying yes. Yes, he out-coached.
It's a roundabout way of saying in total, yes. First half,
right.
No. Second half, yes.
Right. Which he's not wrong in the first half, but
that's why you play 4 quarters.
Somebody remind him that football is 4 quarters long, please.
Yes. One of the things that I think someone asked him about, what is the message that you tell fans who watched what happened this year? And he kind of talked about candidly how no one's more upset than he is. No one was more upset about Mike Williams being hurt than he was. No one was more upset and frustrated about the kind of ending of that game than he was. He did also note that, what happened in that Jacksonville game, the second half, is kind of an exception to the rule since he has been coach of this Chargers team. They noted the times the Chargers have been that scrappy, resilient teams that have come back and won those style of games. 27-point lead, obviously the biggest lead he's blown in his tenure as a Chargers head coach. But he's not wrong there. I think the Chargers overall this season did buck the trend of kind of the Chargers going to Charger and find ways to lose and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. They won 10 games. Now, of course, that loss was just horrific.
It's about as Chargers as you could get historically.
Yes.
So no, you didn't. You only delayed the trend. You didn't buck the trend.
So but I think the trend for him, that was one of the few times that has come and reared its ugly head. And to his point, his quarterback has the most fourth quarter comebacks in the NFL since he's been here. So lots to improve. Things are also not as terrible as some have said. So that's kind of the main takeaways. Jake, I guess probably the one that I think most people had questions about were going into this press conference. What is this offense going to look like? And how is the defense going to look in 2023?
Well, I mean, number one of the biggest questions that you have to have on the there's multiple questions, obviously. One, you have to do a better job of maximizing Justin Herbert. And whether that's through game scheme or weapons or whatever, that's all tied into answering that question. But number two is you need to revitalize this running game. And despite for fantasy owners who had Austin Eckler this year and how those stats may look, the Chargers did not run the ball well throughout
25th. I think it's 25th in the NFL.
That's not sustainable championship.
I'm sorry, I think it's 28th. I think it's 28th. I would love 25th.
That's not sustainable championship football. It could get you to the playoffs, which it did for the Chargers. It was sustainable to a fault. But when you're talking about getting into the gritty days of the playoffs and trying to make a championship run, you need to run the ball better. That was one of the biggest criticisms coming into this playoff season. Like weeks before, we were talking about that. It was something that they needed to improve on. And yeah, they had good games against the Rams and good games against the Cleveland Browns in terms of running the ball. But in terms of creating a more balanced, sustained, high-powered offense, they definitely need to do that. So I'm not sure from the standpoint of, obviously that's an emphasis that they want to get from whoever this offensive coordinator is going to be hired. I'm not sure outside of the quarterback's coach if there are going to be any more circulations as far as the offensive coaches and assistants on that team. You could be seeing new running backs coach. You could be seeing new running game coordinators. This is just speculation, but I'm just thinking if the power of an offensive coordinator for what they were looking for is going to be wanting to bring in a quarterbacks coach that's going to mesh with them, as Brandon Staley was talking about, you would have to think that it would go beyond just a quarterback's coach in terms of developing a more high-powered, balanced offense.
Yep. And Brandon Staley said it quite simply. There's a different level that this team needs to get to on offense. And I think all of us watching, covering this team would agree. Sure, they were productive in terms of yards this last season, but does that convert to points? Largely no. Your defense was pretty good the last like 6 weeks or so, but snap the line the entire year, probably average at best. They have to improve. So I know Daniel Popper put out a list. I know, Jake, you've talked about kind of the list of folks that you would like to see for the offensive coordinator position. Based on what Staley said today, on what he's looking for in an offense and a coordinator, does that cross the name off a couple? Does that circle a few that you were thinking previously?
I mean, it was the comment that he had made about the Kyle Shanahan tree that may have been the biggest indicator on what direction they could go, that it could be with more of a younger, up and coming coordinator position right now for them. Me personally, do I think whether we're talking offense, defense here, one or the other, both, who cares? I definitely think that Brandon Staley needs some head coach, like tenured head coaching experience to be partnered with him. This leads into the conversations that have been had about an i.e. Vic Fangio. Obviously, there's a past connection there between he and Staley, but it's talking about
same thing.
Frank Reich, same thing. Not as much as a personal connection with Staley, but someone who's tenured, who's a veteran offensive coordinator, who has connections with the Chargers, former head coaching experience. That name makes a lot of sense. Now, based off of that little nugget that Staley said in terms of where they could be looking from that Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay tree, now it brings up other names. Again, Zach Robinson, Mike LaFleur's. Again, I'm trying to remember the tight ends coach who's also being looked at from the Rams currently right now, who actually is being considered highly coveted. And yes, I'm using the Google machine now trying to figure that out, but apparently I can't even manipulate that. No, it is not. No, it's not Wes Phillips. No, excuse me. It's Thomas Brown.
Thomas Brown. There we go.
Thomas Brown. Excuse me. That is another name that has circulated out there, but that both Daniel Popper and a few other people have put out there as potential replacements. I don't know, Dan. I don't know. This will be interesting in this circumstance. Now, I fully believe, if we're just talking about in general, outside of the comments that Brandon Staley has said today, as far as his vision goes for this offense, you have to put this in perspective that you have one of the more creative minds in the entire NFL that you have to play twice a year in Andy Reid. And you have to somehow match or at least contend with that type of creativity, because it goes beyond that. Because once you hit the playoffs, it's a whole nother level that you're going to have to get to. So how can you maximize Justin Herbert as a quarterback from where he is now with 3 years under his belt, with the offense that you have put around him? And obviously you would expect that they would put more weapons around him in this offseason in terms of how you can get better, and an overall philosophy that, whether that's balance, a high-powered run game, a high-powered passing game, but there's so many elements that are in this. And if it's not going to be from an offensive perspective in terms of overall tenure and experience from a veteran presence who's been there before, this will be an interesting hire.
It's going to be, we've said it $1 million words, it's going to be interesting. I do think that it is kind of a breath of fresh air in a way to hear what his goals are for this offense, and for him to come out and blatantly say the way this offense was run the last 2 years, especially this year, wasn't it. And I think it sounds like he knows what his quarterback is capable of. You know, there was one part where he kind of talked about the importance of the running game and the lack of continuity. He said at the line of scrimmage was challenging, but specifically noted technique, fundamentals, and mindset are all things that need to improve. Technique, fundamentals, and mindset. So technique and fundamentals, that's like offensive coaching 101. I don't necessarily know if that's on Brandon Staley as much as it would be as an offensive coordinator. And so I'm curious what the mindset of Joe Lombardi was versus what he wants. He meaning Brandon Staley. I'm curious what the fundamentals were, at least from an execution perspective.
See, that's the right question to ask Dan, because when he said that and said they don't, when he basically gave his initial comments of why Lombardi and Shane Day were no longer with this team.
They were unaligned.
Right. Which then just makes you think of the question, well, okay, they've both been a part of the staff now for 2 years. What was the vision entering this season? Great question. If it doesn't match now, then when did it match? Or what was the vision? Or has it changed in the last, since Saturday, all of a sudden? I mean, what are we doing here? So that might be just a admittance from Staley to say, as a whole, we need to have a different vision of what it needs to look like in the future. And I have a vision of what that can look like. And that's unfortunately not been with what we've had with this coaching staff. So that will now have to be tailored.
And let's not forget, Joe Lombardi was not his first choice.
No.
Fourth. Was not his second choice. Now reports are not his third choice. So the ones who he did not get, you would think are probably who he envisioned, i.e. Mike McDaniel. Now, where do you think... That's one press conference down. We'll have Tom Telesco's tomorrow, which we'll discuss. Overall, I guess the one thing we did not discuss was the Will Hoyt, linebacker coach.
Yeah, I was hoping that we were going to flip this over to the defense because Matt Will Hoyt getting fired.
Shocker.
After having generated the productive seasons that he had for Kaiser White, for Drew Tranquil. If that is if that's the first firing that's going to happen on defense, which
there's got to be more coming.
There has to be more coming because Matt Wilhoit probably would have been one of the last coaches that I would have ever considered as far as who may be on the hot seat. He would have been one of the last names that I would have thought of personally.
Staley did say, Jake, that the perimeter and secondary tackling were big areas need to focus on improving. And so I believe that perimeter component is a linebacker issue. Which, not just linebacker, but I could see that being the case. You've seen how many explosive run plays they've given up on the perimeter this year.
I get it, but it's not just a linebacker issue.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
It's not just a linebacker issue. But yeah, for him to be the first one to go, I think a lot of people started scratching their heads after that one ended up taking place.
I don't want to speculate on who's next. The one thing I will say is, at the end of the day, fans, pundits, players, whoever, you can be upset with the performance of the team or performance of this coaching staff. I do get a little irked, when people are going around like it's Christmas when they see somebody get fired. Like, as much as it's a performance thing and it's because your team is not doing well, this is also a human being who was just fired. I'm sure their money situation's fine, but just think about yourself when you've had failures and imagine everyone coming to, celebrate your failures. Like, it's not a good look. So while we can be excited, we can be energized about kind of the future. I think there's some level of humanity, of grace we can show. Doesn't mean frustrations aren't warranted, but just wanted to get on the soapbox for 25 seconds to...
Jesus, you should have had some classical music playing right behind you with that, Dan. My God.
You look, as you're doing the violin impression, it just really brought me back to me being the guy on the Titanic. That's just playing the music as the ship is sinking.
As the ship is sinking.
that would be me, apparently.
Look, the football gods, they're a fickle bunch. But when it comes to coaching changes NFL fan bases can be even worse.
By the way, social media, Chargers fans have been absolutely irate. And on a whole nother one. For rightly so. I get it.
Yeah, don't forget that. Rightfully so. They have, Dan, there
are some things that are a little too far. Let's
look.
Maybe it was the tequila.
I get it. Maybe, there are certain lines as far as maybe things that you shouldn't say, but in terms of fans being upset, pissed off,
frustrated,
frustration, I don't really think that there should be many holds barred on that. No, not at all. I feel him.
So we got some questions answered from Brandon Staley. I think we have many other opportunities, especially tomorrow with Tom Telesco's interview coming up. What questions were not answered and or dodged? And what are you looking forward to seeing from Tom Telesco or from hearing from Tom Telesco?
Dan, I think that his decision and answers to the questions on what happened with Mike Williams are going to be with Brandon Staley for a long time. Even during times when the team is looking good and he is winning, I would just hope that he learns from this mistake. I know he still basically had said that, and Popper kept pushing back on him for this, basically saying, well, the Bengals-Ravens game was over. Couldn't you have had a contingent plan that was in place for this? Because I get what Brandon Staley's saying as far as actives, inactives, the time frame in which that game ended to when they had to have their inactives in.
That literally what people on the roster could be there. Yes, I get it.
I get that. But he basically said his contingent plan was to get them out in the second half. So see, as a head coach, again, Mike Williams wasn't the first person injured in this game. He wasn't the second person injured in this game. He was the third. So the moment that I see Kenneth Murray go down with a stinger, or I see Joey Bosa come right back out, considering that he was just coming back from his injury a week prior, the whole plan gets thrown out the window at that point. Why would you want to possibly risk anything when you see things like this?
The plan is to go out fishing,
right,
on your little canoe, for an hour and a half, and then when you see a great white shark nearby, you're not going to still go for an hour and a half. Like, you're going to pack up, go home.
Yes.
It's not
so. It felt like the same type of answers that he gave after that game was over against the Broncos in Week 18.
I do think, Jake, on that note, we talked about it a little bit during the live show the other day. I think that comes from his unwavering belief and his unwavering competitive nature, which I'm not saying it's right, but I think that's something that might need to be reeled in a little bit, is like how much belief you have in what you can do and what will or will not go wrong versus like the reality of what can go wrong.
Well, based off of what we've seen from his coaching examples over the last 2 years, whether that's, say, the fourth down decisions or his decision in Cleveland that almost gave away the game, his keeping Justin Herbert in the first Jacksonville game in Week 3, even with the torn rib cartilage, or this example with Mike Williams, I don't really think that that anybody's going to be able to reel that in other than himself. So
I agree.
He's going to have to learn from it. He's going to have to be he's going to have to be smarter in these type of situations. So he has to learn. And it's not just beyond this. He still has to learn a number of different things as a head coach. But you just hope, given this situation, that it's a hard pill to swallow, and there is no reason why people should not ask these questions of him moving forward, because in retrospect, it was a huge, irresponsible mistake for him to do what he did that in turn hampered his team the following week in the playoffs.
Yeah. I agree. And maybe to your point, maybe if he brings in someone with experience as a head coach that has experience in these kind of situations, is like, hey, Brandon, I get it. I know we want to go in there with a mindset and want to establish a culture and not give up and blah, but we also want to have Mike Williams for the playoffs. Like, just saying.
I mean, which I feel you on that. But Brian Daboll is a first-time head coach. and he made that move without even thinking.
Yep,
And
I know. Again, I'm not backing
his
it.
Giants came out swinging the following week in the playoffs.
So, Jake, I went through, I asked you the question about what we learned and did not hear yet from Staley and what we hope to hear from Telesco. I went back to my kind of list that I put out on social media of like the things that I need to see from Brandon Staley or want answers about. I asked about transparency. I want to know about the learnings and mistakes, what went right and wrong, game plans, execution, roster, and adjustments. I got half of that. I didn't get a chance to hear the, some of the decisions on the roster stuff, like why, the whole Trey Pipkins thing or the Brandon Fajoko thing or the 3 quarterback thing or the 4 wide receiver thing. Like, I still have questions about that. Not sure if Telesco is going to be able to answer that, but I still have questions there. Plan for how to fix inconsistencies in coaching, messaging, roster, and player execution. I would say I probably got 2/3 of that. Inconsistency in coaching, he talked about a lot on the defense and offense for the kind of the changes needed. Talked about the messaging in terms of like what they're looking for from fundamentals, execution, kind of where to focus. Player execution, he brought up like that was a big issue that plagued them in the Jacksonville game. Things I did not get that I'm hoping to get from Telesco: clear understanding of roles and responsibilities. We still don't know. We got some of it. We know that Brandon Staley is going to call plays on defense. So that answers your defensive question for 2023. We don't know what that's going to look like for the offensive coordinator position and what the offensive coordinator's role is versus what Brandon Staley is. I'm hoping to find out kind of how the scheme will look in terms of like what types of player / roster they're going to look for. I doubt Tom Telesco is going to do that, but I'm interested to see what that looks like on offense specifically. Like, are they going to bulk up the offensive line? Will they bring in speed? Do they need a star tight end? Like those kinds of questions. The one thing that I wish, and maybe it's unfair for me to ask this right now, Jake. The one thing I wish we get to hear more of is with the new offensive coordinator, which maybe we'll hear it when the coordinator is hired, is like what they're going to do to unlock and unleash, no pun intended, Justin Herbert. Like, you go and watch some of these games in the playoffs that are happening, which is still painful, but watch how dynamic folks like Joe Burrow, like Josh Allen, like Patrick Mahomes, like watch how dynamic these guys are allowed to be. And then go watch a Chargers offense when they have a dude who is just as good, if not better than some of them, but they just don't do it. So that's the biggest question I think left unanswered for me, is specifically with the quarterback position. How are you going to unlock that? Because obviously he's a great quarterback already, but you see the potential with him and you see kind of the handcuffs that are dragging him down. So those are kind of my main questions, Jake. We talked a bunch about this press conference today, what to look forward to tomorrow. Was there anything takeaways from you that you wanted to kind of bring up before we wrap up today's show?
I guess we'll still see, as it was alluded to, that the coach team finished, and I wouldn't assume so. I think that for the speculation that was out there that if Brandon Staley remained with this team, that the caveat would be that there would be a huge overhaul in terms of the team goes. I would expect to see more of that. Could even see more of it before Tom Telesco takes his press conference tomorrow. We'll see if that happens. But as you were saying, Dan, I don't expect him to say anything in terms of specific players, specific needs, anything that comes up with contracts. He's just going to give a very general answer. If we know anything about Tom, he'll basically say, we obviously want him here. To summarize, we basically want X player here, and we'll work out those contracts eventually, because he always handles contract negotiations very close to the chest, behind closed doors. Doesn't really elaborate on too much of it in front of the media. But I think a lot of it, Dan, will probably, outside of maybe a few answers, will be a lot of what Brandon Staley said today, especially in terms of what a new offensive coordinator would have to look like, what the quote-unquote vision of this offense is with Justin Herbert at the helm. And we'll see where it goes from there. We'll see if there's anything that's different. But I see it being maybe about 70% very similar answers to what Brandon Staley gave today.
So let me ask you this as we wrap this show up. I think there were a lot of questions, a lot of feelings going into this press conference. A lot of concerns with Brandon Staley and kind of the level of coaching, expertise, you name it. How are you feeling after this press conference in terms of your faith in Brandon Staley prior to the press conference?
I mean, I think something that should be encouraging in terms of whether this is a vision that Brandon Staley just thought of after Saturday's game, or if he actually listened to and saw what was taking place from the outside media and getting his criticism there. Hell, from the fan base alone that was frustrated enough with it. If these words are correct, that he is planning on making this much of a change to benefit Justin Herbert, then as of right now, that's a good first step. Now, whether that step is carried through over the next several months, time will tell on that, because there is some personnel that you have to get in order to fully encapsulate this vision of yours. So we shall see if that takes place. But I liked hearing those comments in terms of the justification for why Vince Lombardi and Shane Day were not there. So it does give you some nugget of good hope, but we'll see what that vision truly looks like and is manifested to over the next several months.
Needless to say, this is the biggest offseason of Brandon Staley's career, as well as the head coach, or the offensive coordinator, to be of his career, of Tom Telesco's
Tie
career.
Tom Telesco into this, Dan.
Yeah.
What's weird about that is, you know how bullish I was on Tom Telesco as we went into the offseason last year.
Yep.
And I said it was the hottest seat that he has been on, considering how much cap space he had to spend. He had to hit on his draft picks. This team obviously had to make the playoffs, which they did.
I know that pains you to say.
The bare minimum.
Right. So is it hotter now?
With a D- average. Yes.
Is it hotter now?
Yes.
And you saw how much he did last offseason. Now, take away the draft is kind of an incomplete grade. We don't know. Some of those things take time. But Telesco did some magic last offseason with this roster. So,
like
to
I
Jake's
said,
point, he is.
I said this on our little Twitter discussion that we had on Sunday night, that I firmly believe that as it stands right now, Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco's career with the Chargers are currently linked. So if something does not come to fruition in the 2023-2024 season, that could be the end of this regime, and that would be a full blow up.
So, Brandon Staley today answered a ton of questions. I think he did about as well as he could have, given the grilling he was given. I think he was pretty contrite, pretty honest. Also didn't let everything out. I think there's going to be some things we'll find out later. But for the most part, set the vision for this Chargers team going into the 2023 offseason, which now the Chargers are in. Tomorrow's episode we will discuss the Tom Telesco press conference, as well as other topics that come up between now and then. For Jake Hefner, you can find him at Jake D. Hefner. For myself, you can find me at Dan W. Sports. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed.